This is the second inside drill, so I had another one like this Friday night where I said, okay, let's set it up specifically for people with minimal space and isolation and with minimal training tools. So here we have the friendly neighborhood hammer, right? Excellent. Excellent. So most households have a hammer. If it wasn't for isolation, anybody who needed a hammer could go grab one from even the dollar store. And looking at the attributes of the hammer, right? We have a striking surface, which we can use, very similar to a short mace, if you will. Just as a side note, there are lineman hammers, which are much longer, about 18 to 24 inches long, right? And they actually, when you look at them closely, when you look at for instance, Toronto's poleaxe, they have a metal poleaxe in addition to the training axe. You have spikes on one side, hitting surface on the other side, spike on the end, right? When you look at historical footman's hammers, they had longer handles, sure, like a lineman's hammer, but you had an impact surface and a spike surface, right? So there is some thought here in terms of how it's used and how it would have been used in medieval times, but for now we're just looking at isolation, training, keeping engaged, keeping moving, right? And so starting out, and I'll start out with the earphones attached, and then later on when I'm moving back from the camera, I'm going to take these off, and I'll need someone to raise a hand. If you have a question, I'll go back to the mic. So we're going to start out warming up with wrist cuts. So we're going to just move the hammer forward. And I'm going to go glacially slow on the demonstration, and then I'll move it. And you can see I'm rotating the hammer, right? So we have an impact location right about here, where your wrist is just about to the point where it doesn't want to do anymore. And then you turn the wrist over. So this is where you're striking, recovering, and then as this gets turned over, what we call the false edge, the spike, is going to come back towards us. And this is going to come back towards our right shoulder, and then once the hammer is pointed just about straight down, which is hard to see from this side, I'll go to this side, that's when we start turning the true edge, or the hammerhead of the hammer, back, because it's going to go rotate back towards our shoulder, so that then when we're about halfway back, it's going to be ready to chamber to come forward again. So I'll do this very slowly, a couple of times forward facing and then sideways. And I'm being very anal retentive on this because I want to be very clear in the striking body mechanics. So we hit a target, we start to recover and turn the handle over, and then the claw comes back, and then we turn the face, so the true edge back, and now we should have the true edge facing behind our right shoulder, so then it can come forward again. So this forms a circuit. Strike, turn, recover, back, turn again, so the hammer is facing towards your back shoulder, and right about here it's chambered so that it's sitting down by your right shoulder with the hammerhead up so that it can come back forward again. Now this same body mechanic is used with the sword. In fact, the sword, stick, mace, right? Any of those striking weapons, poleaxe, you have this circuit of the weaponry going forward, striking, recovering. So starting to turn, and this is where your wrist is turning over and coming back. Now I find these slow speed actions to be very good, not only when you're recovering from an injury or just watching TV, watching a movie, listening to the radio, because what it does is it allows you to very, very slowly work on the body mechanics that are essential and finding the rough spots, if you will, the points at which you look and say, my technique is not perfect and I need to adjust that. Speaking of which, I'm just going to take a second and adjust the camera. It's pointing a little bit, the camera on the cell phone, it was pointing a little low. There we go. So, to reiterate, a major component of EMMA is trying to accurately reproduce the body mechanics of a medieval martial artist, and in terms of striking, in this case using a hammer as an example, and using a wrist cut, and this is a right fendente blow that we're doing right now. Then we strike the target, we turn as we recover, and we have the, in this case, the spike, what I think of as the false edge from the blade, coming back towards our right shoulder and then turning over. So that now the head of the weapon is facing forward, and then we have the acceleration phase. So the acceleration phase, out, the impact event, turning over, so rotation in order to recover, and then coming back, and then turning back over again. I'm going to do this 2 more times, and then I'll demonstrate it from the side. And then later on we'll be doing this at a little bit more speed. Those that want to continue at the slow speed, that's absolutely fine. In these sorts of practices, I like to layer on things that brand new recruits can do and things that more advanced recruits can work on, so that everybody has something to work on, nobody gets left behind, and nobody gets bored. Last one, strike, turn the head over, recover. And we get chambered back to here. I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn to the side. So you guys keep doing what you're doing, and I'll just position myself so that now I'm coming, accelerating out, striking. And the target I would think of here, gruesome though it is from the Canadian context, is side of the temple, jaw, neck, possibly shoulder, upper chest, right? So this is striking, turning the handle over and up. If this was the sword, I'd be saying right now, hands high or you die. So this would be coming up to what we call a fenestra as we recover with the sword. And then the spikes coming back. Then the axe is, in this case, the hammer, not the axe, is turning over. And then coming back out again. Now, for fun, I'm going to go see if I can get my cord to stretch so I can go to the other side. So, hammer's coming out, impacting, turning over, and then bring the claw back, and then turning back over again. And now we're recovered and ready to go. Now this is all just the arm. So I was saying wrist cut, essentially this is a wrist and elbow cut, if you will. So you hear us talk about short compass, long compass, wrist, elbow, shoulder cuts, if you will. And I'll deal with that in just a second. We'll go through this one more time. And of course, at any point, if you're feeling shoulder, wrist, arm, elbow burning, just stop, rotate your shoulder. This is informal. I like being able to see what you guys are doing, because then I can make a comment or I can address something if I see something that needs to be addressed. But yeah, just do what you're going to do, and that's fine. So let me address different types of cuts. I mentioned wrist cuts. You keep everything, your wrist, just pinned in time. So I'm just using my left hand to just demonstrate. I've got a pivot here, and I'm just cutting around the wrist. This is the quickest and yet the least powerful of the actions, right? And you can see how I'm doing a full action with the axe head, with a hammer head, because I do have tomahawks about this size and shape I like to train with as well. So around the hammer, I'm doing a full rotation, but these can be shortened. That's a tiny little, almost a bolognese reminiscent hit, right? So you're slipping the weapon from somebody else's weapon and striking, possibly striking the other side, right? So I'm getting ahead of myself. That would get into flicks and fishes. So we have a strike here, or we could strike over there. Now, of course, we could strike under in a satani, or even, although I find it painful, dig under for another satani. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. We have our strike, and then a little bit larger, and then a little bit larger still, and then the full wrist strike. So there's graduations through this, and which one is used is tactical, right? If you have to go, if your contact with the opponent's weapon is here, up on the weak of the weapon, let's call it, towards the end, then you'd have to do a larger motion to disengage and come around. If it's down here, and you just slip the hand back and to get off, there it is. Or if you're feinting, you come in with the strike and you haven't even hit yet, you can just change the angle. But I digress. That was wrist. Let's do it on the other side. So we're going to take the left hand, we're going to strike, rotate the weapon open, bring the claw back, turn the head over, so now it's chambered, and then come back out again. And I'm going to start out with the middle compass, if you will, the wrist and elbow strikes. So we're going to strike, turn the blade over, recover, rotate around, and then out. And I'm less skilled at this with my left hand, which shows me I need to drill more. There we go, and then turn it over, and then strike there. Two more. And turn the blade over. Last one. Good. Now we're going to go back to the right hand. And we'll try to go back and forth between the right and the left hand more. Let's put our right foot forward for the right hand ones, and we'll have our left foot forward for the left hand ones. This follows more of the Bolognese tradition, but just for today's thing, we're going to do that. So I talked about wrist cuts, right? And then we were doing a lot of wrist and elbow cuts. We were moving more of the arm. You might say, what about a wrist, elbow, shoulder, or a longer compass action? So if we come in with the wrist, shoulder, and then you can see the arm going back. So it's a larger action, right? So from an exercise standpoint, you would start with the smaller actions and then move to the larger actions, engage more of the muscles. From a martial arts standpoint, this gives a lot of false time. There's a lot of periods in time in which, if I was fighting Daniel in free play, he would thrust the face, because I'm removing the weapon, I'm not fighting behind the weapon, right? Whereas here, I'm fighting behind the weapon, keeping the middle balance of the weapon between myself and Daniel. And if I was going through this cycle to get ready for another strike and he did something, I could react. I could move to frontale, I could move down to breve, etc., right? But I digress. Now we're going to switch back to the left hand. We'll repeat a couple of the short compass, just the wrist actions. We're going to incorporate more of the elbow, so you've got more of the hand motion, arm motion. Now we're going to do a full compass cut, long shoulder, strike. And again, I need more practice with using the left arm for this, because I am seeing some sloppiness when I go slow here, which is why we drill. Now, for fun, let's look at, there's also some deviation here for me because I'm trying to avoid hanging up on my cord right there. And I do have a Bluetooth headset in the mail. Now, what are we doing when we go through this, right? Let's switch back to the right hand. So from here, as we strike, and then we recover, I mentioned fenestra. So you could argue we're going through a hanging fenestra from the Fiore system, and then as we rotate back, we're chambering back into posta di donna, right? For the medium compass. So I like to think of it in terms of the posta because, of course, this is how Fiore di Liberi's system is laid out. So the way to walk, which is kind of hidden in the text, and then postas for each weapon set. Now, if we go to the longer compass action that I was talking about, where we strike, and then we turn over, and then we go low, we're effectively going down through right tail, and then up to di donna, and then out. So in some of the sword practices where you'll hear me talk about the posta transitions, saying, okay, which postas are we transitioning through, and which ones are we striking from, right? So that's context to what we're doing here. Let's start on the left side again. We'll do a few more of these before we move on. So we're going to take di donna and come out and strike with the left fendente. Bring the head back. We're going to do the long arm motion, so this is going to go low, down to left tail, and then up to right posta di donna, and then back out again. And again, there's an artificial aspect to this because I'm trying not to hang up on my cable. But I'm going to now step back a bit. So I'm going to have my microphone down here. Hopefully you guys can still hear me. Every once in a while I'll ask for a thumbs up. You guys are good? You can hear me okay? Yeah, good. Okay. So this should be better. You should be able to see me better from here. And I'm just going to check my camera for a second. I'm trying to have video of each of the practices that we do, so then I can post the video. And this doesn't show you guys, it just shows me. But that way the video will be available so that then if you want to repeat the practice, you just load it up, right? Good. So we have the right arm, and we were doing wrist cuts. We were doing elbow cuts. We were doing shoulder cuts, right? Or long compass, with the understanding that it could be anything in between, right? And we could have footwork involved as well, which we haven't talked about, which is fine. So, what are we going to do next? Now, we're going to do the same thing, except instead of landing on the right fendente line, which goes from teeth to knees, let's have our right shoulder, right foot forward. That way our right foot's aligned with the right hand. So to explain this for a second, if we had our left foot forward, we'd be reaching across the body. Right foot forward, we're reaching out. We're extending out into what we call longa in the wrestling section. So this is our longest reach with the weapon in one hand. So instead of striking right fendente, we're going to strike left fendente. We're going to have right foot forward. We're going to start with hammer in the one hand, and we're going to do short wrist cuts to the left fendente. Now, how is this going to be different, right? Before we were going to the outside, we were covering to our shoulder side, right? What we call the outside of our body. Now we're going to recover to the inside. So the hand's going to go up this way, and then the axe head's going to go, the hammer head's going to go back and then come out. So we're doing the same body mechanic, only to the left side instead of to the right side. Now, I'm so used to fighting behind the weapon that this will often cause my face to be obscured when I'm doing these drills. So I'm going to try to make sure that I don't do that, just for the purpose of demonstration here. The exact same body mechanic, except going to the inside instead of the outside. So let's walk through that. We have the hammer coming forward, striking to the right instead of to the left of their head in the medieval context, and then recovering, and then bringing the false edge, the spike, back towards us. And then when it's pointing about straight down, then we start to turn the head over because we want to chamber for the next strike. We'll do two more, and then I'll step to the side so you can see that from the side. And if we're all remember, towards the end, I'll show what this looks like with a shorter sword, just for context. Good. I'm going to step to the side. I'll show this from the side a couple of times, and then we'll switch to the left hand. So this should look very similar to what we did before, because it is very similar, except now we're bringing the hammerhead down to the left, and then back. Right about here, I start turning the wrist over, and now it's chambered and ready to go forward. Now with the sword, you'll be very aware of the blade alignment. In this case, we're substituting the hammerhead and the hammer spike as our awareness of where the blade is. So the blade, in this case, is coming back, turning over, and accelerating out with the hammerhead, which stands in for what we call the true edge with the sword. Good. Roll your shoulder. I'm just going to take a second, see if I remember where I put my shoulder weapon. So just keep drilling for a second. I will be right back. There it is. So, like I said, just to provide context, here's a machete. That's it was a $5 machete that I upgraded by putting a cross guard and a handle on to make just a small training tool. So what we've been doing, true edge, rotating the weapon back, accelerating out. So I think you can see here the false edge coming back and the true edge coming out. Now in this case, with the machete, which is a close cousin to a messer, we have sharp edge, blunt edge, right? So then it becomes even more clear when we're coming out with the cutting edge and then coming up and then recovering with the blunt edge and then coming out. And it's this acceleration phase there that does the work, that does the damage. And I was striking to the picture instead of striking to the camera, which makes all the difference, right? So I should be striking to there, actually. Now the cuts we're working on here are what they call reversi, right? Reverso. Coming back, turning the blade over, now it's chambered and coming out, right? So that's what it looks like. And that, again, coming back to apartment friendly sort of drilling, it comes with a sheath, so you can put a sheath on it and train without accidentally hitting something. And it's short enough that I can do it even with short ceilings here. So let's switch the left hand. Left foot forward, left hand, and we're going to strike to the inside, which in this case is going to be to the right. And then turn the handle over, and then rotate back, and then turn over, and then out. Now, some classes will do this for an hour. I tend to be impatient, and I tend to go through and say, let's do this for 5 minutes and move on to the next thing, and let's cover as much material as we can in the class. Part of my goal with these videos is to instill a little bit more patience and discipline into myself through subjecting you guys to more repetition. I mentioned earlier polishing the stone. This is where the more time that you spend before in-person classes drilling the basics, such as posta, footwork, body mechanics such as this, the more it'll just become automatic. You won't even think about it anymore. And then you'll get more out of the drills in class, and you'll get more out of the free play, because you'll be more relaxed in the free play and the drills, which means you'll be less tense. Turns into more endurance, faster response times, and that's what we're looking for. We're essentially training our bodies in the language of a martial art to the point where we're so fluent that we can just have on-the-fly casual conversations, even sometimes between multiple people at the same time, no sweat. So that's the goal. As well as in isolation, just trying to keep from climbing the walls and screaming at each other.